Well, everybody, we're just going to wait a couple more minutes and let some people trickle in, and then we'll get started. So just hang tight.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Mason, and I'm the program manager here at Nuun. We're going live here from Nuun HQ in Seattle, Washington. With us, we have Vishal, Patel, the chief nutritionist here at Nuun, as well as Jason here, our special guest from Kinetic Rehab, a company based here out of Seattle. And they do an awesome job helping people stay healthy, get healthy, and really optimize their athletic goals. And so today, what we're going to do is use Vishal's experience as well as Jason's to answer all of your off-season questions. So we had a lot of questions about strength, flexibility, speed, all kinds of good stuff. And so we put together this education for all of you ambassadors. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. And if you have questions, please type them in the chat, and we'll do our best to get through with them by right at the end. You should expect this to take about a half hour. So stay tuned and learn a lot of good stuff. And now I'm going to kick it over to our presenters.
All right, hey guys. So I'll kick things off here, I'll kind of give a little bit of more of an introduction for Jason here, building on what Mason talked about earlier. So yeah, Kinetic Sports Rehab is an amazing place here in Seattle. They have quite a few clinics within the Seattle metro area. I personally have been working with them now for my running health and mobility for about 5-6 months, and I gotta say I've seen a lot of chiropractors. I've been to a lot of clinics, and I have been dealing with the same nagging injuries for about 3 years until I went to see Kinetic and really took their approach on rehab. And really, it was more than just what they did at the clinic. It was how they wanted to serve the community and help everyone just move more through their education platform, in which we thought it'd be a great idea to have them in here and kind of combine our two knowledges to help everyone kind of optimize their off season. So a quick kind of overview on what we'll be talking about. So like I said, we'll go through nutrition, hydration, and then Jason will kind of kick it off with some functional mobility, strength building. We'll talk about maintaining speed, flexibility, wrap it up with some motivation, and at the end, we'll kind of channel a lot of your questions ahead of time. So yeah, so we'll start with nutrition. So the way that we'll kind of structure and format the way that the webinar is, we're going to tell you what you should focus on and what you should kind of avoid. So, in the off season and especially the winter, we see athletes kind of scale back on their training and oftentimes use that time to build up a base or to kind of fix some ailments that they have. And there's a lot of things on the nutrition side that, you want to focus in on during the off season to kind of optimize all the benefits you would get from kind of lower training and focusing on some other ailments. And, a couple things just on the macro level. So think kind of more, more of an overview, big pictures. You want to dial back the carbohydrates. As training intensity increases or decreases, your total carbohydrate account should also increase or decrease. You want to keep your fats steady. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, fats were really bad for you, but now with all the research that we're seeing, we're finding that, oh no, fats are great for you. Well, they were always great. There were just two categories of fats. There were good fats and bad fats. So you should always kind of keep your fats steady. Always kind of look for those unsaturated or polyunsaturated fats and lipids to kind of take care of that portion of your diet. And then you want to kind of increase your protein intake. I'm not saying by double or anything like that, but about 5 to 10% increasing your protein, because a lot of times what we find in the off season is that athletes focus in on strength, and you want to make sure that you're giving your body enough protein to complement the strength that you're building so your muscles can repair and get stronger. Kind of down at the micro level is, vitamin D. I try to make it an emphasis that everybody should always monitor their vitamin D intake. When I was still in school, we did a lot of research in this area, and we found that a lot of the recommended dosage by, the FDA or the National Institute of Health were actually too low. So we always encourage people to, consume a lot of vitamin D, especially in the winter, especially if we're up here in the Pacific Northwest like we are here, where, pretty much from October to February, the sun doesn't really shine that often. So for us, it's even more important to kind of make sure that our vitamin D intake is high so our immune system stays strong, and then our bones and our muscles can also stay strong as well. Calcium and magnesium are going to also play a key role in making sure your muscles and bones are lubricated and have the flexibility and the nutrients that they need to complement a lot of the strength and mobility that you'll be getting through, some of the stuff that Jason will cover later on in the presentation, in addition to kind of increasing your just overall strength training and base building. Some stuff to kind of avoid. I know the off season, I often do think is a time to kind of reflect and celebrate, to kind of reflect on a lot of the things that you did accomplish during your training, and to celebrate those accomplishments as well. But the reflection part should really be to try to find those small weaknesses and try to improve on them. And, the celebration part can often lead to overindulging. So, you want to keep your hydration pretty much steady throughout the day, in season, out of season, because that's just going to help reduce kind of those overindulging cravings that you might get throughout the day. You're not exercising as high of an intensity. You're not burning as many as calories in the off season, or you really shouldn't be. You should dial that back. So it's important to kind of adjust your food intake to meet some of those needs as well. The off season's a great time to experiment sometimes. However, you don't want to experiment by making drastic, kind of changes to your diet. One of the main questions is, should I go, a high fat or keto, or something like that. And for the people who have heard me on webinars for a while, you know that I usually recommend, not usually, I always recommend not to kind of stick to some of those bad diets because they often restrict a major food group. I do believe in balancing macronutrients, so your carbs, fats, and proteins. And that can go from in season to out of season. And you can decrease one and slightly increase another. But if you want to try to make a big holistic change and you really want to give it a shot, go for it. But know that it will take your body about 3 to 6 weeks to kind of adapt to those major changes, because your body's going to need new energy sources to fire off on. So you just have to kind of get used to that. And there can be some risks to that. It will alter kind of your normal physiological process. And then you never know what can happen. So it's always a good idea to kind of slowly transition into it rather than making a drastic change all at once. So after, nutrition, kind of that base, I touched a little bit on hydration, but, we want to just make sure that we're emphasizing all of, all the benefits of hydration, both during exercise and, at rest, and especially in the off season. And, that's truly why we created a kind of a suite of products at Nuun here. We know that your hydration needs during exercise, at rest, and recovery are different. So we wanted to make sure that we are offering products that kind of fit those need states so everyone can have an optimal choice regardless of where they are in their training or in the season. So, you want to continue to choose those drinks with that optimal electrolyte balance, and everything within having that right balance will just help you absorb a lot of the nutrients that you are consuming. Nuun Vitamins is a great product to kind of consume, really have a little bit of a higher emphasis within your off season, because it has the optimal amount of electrolytes to just absorb the fluids while you're at rest. And it gives you that nice blend of vitamins and minerals in there. And 3 of the micronutrients that we indicated that you should increase your intake of, vitamin D, calcium, and magnesium, all are in Nuun Vitamins. So it kind of fits that need as well. And then, if you're doing, different training, if you're, doing CrossFit or high intensity, just be conscious of your body's needs for fluids. So, if you're not exercising for over an hour, you really don't need like performance or something really calorically dense. Our electrolyte product will work great for that. And, doing simple sweat tests before you start the new training and probably in the middle of it will kind of help with making sure you're adjusting your fitness level to your how much fluids your body really needs. Some things to avoid are, should be a no-brainer. The high sugar sweetened beverages, they're dehydrating. They're not doing any benefits for your body. It's just excess calories, and really just they're empty calories as well. Over consuming alcoholic drinks. I know in the off season I mentioned it is time to celebrate. But, do it in moderation, everything in moderation. I'm not going to lecture people on not consuming a glass of beer or some wine or something like that. But just know your limits and note that it will kind of affect workouts you have the next day or two. So I'm going to kick it over to Jason now, and he'll kind of just go through some functional mobility, strength training, and flexibility.
Before you start, Jason, if you want to give a quick rundown, if we missed anything about Kinetic at the beginning, or an intro on yourself, feel free to do that. Plug that in, and then we can get rolling.
Okay, I think you guys did a pretty good job, but more or less we combine a bunch of different modalities like sports chiropractic, sports medicine, different soft tissue modalities like cupping and draft and active release, and then we combine all of those types of therapy with a bunch of functional rehabilitation. So it's kind of a really fun, high energy environment where we just teach people to empower themselves to move and feel better. So that's really about it.
Cool. All right. Have at it.
Cool. So functional mobility, we had a lot of questions on mobility and strength and how to approach those things. So really healthy joints should move freely and easily. And so I always encourage people to try to express full ranges of motion in all of their joints. And a lot of people want to increase their flexibility or mobility, whatever keyword you like to use, and they tend to focus on stretching out the muscles over and over without much consideration at making sure the joint is functioning at a high level too. So taking the time to do joint circles and whatever that might be is really, really important to keep up the health of not only the tissues that surround and support the joint, but the joint itself. There's a bunch of different tools out there that you can create a baseline for where you're currently at, and this is really important as you go into the off season. So there's a screen out there called the Functional Movement Screen. It's FMS, and there's a lot of FMS specialists in our area. Basically, it's a series of about 10 movements that gives you an idea of your stability and mobility in different planes of motion. It gives you a quick score so that you can figure out where you're at and where your needs are, where your strengths are, where your weaknesses lie, and then use that information to develop your training protocols and go through maybe weeks or months of this new training program and see where you're at. Go through the test again in a month or so and see if you're making improvements. And if you're not making the progress you want to, you can then make adjustments so you can continue making the strides that you need to. So there's lots of ways to go about strength training. I always encourage people to start from the ground up. The feet are probably the most overlooked aspect of training the body in general. So most of us just stuff our feet inside of shoes, lace them up and go for our runs or go to the gym or whatever that might be. And it's pretty important to make sure that we can be stable through different positions without our shoes on sometimes. We need our toes to work optimally. We need to have our arch nice and healthy and strong without collapsing inward. So that's a really important thing. Like, can you stand on one foot and take a look at your ankle and see how much it's moving around? And that might give you a good indication if you should spend a little bit more time focusing on that specific area. But beyond that, muscular adaptation and strength really happens when there's a lot of variability involved. So changing directions, changing the amount of force used, changing speed, load, things like that can really, really help you continue to progress throughout the off season. And running and cycling both are very sagittal plane movements, meaning like all of the motions happen in one direction. There's not a lot of side to side or lateral movement. There's not a lot of rotational elements in there. So doing lateral lunges, for instance, would be a really cool way to challenge your stability moving in different directions. But it doesn't really require a gym membership or an expensive equipment at home. There's great ways to do body weight training, and that can be really rewarding in its own right. Yoga is a great way to do that. Martial arts, there's gymnastics training, like anything like that can be a lot of fun and can complement the stuff you're already doing really well, and can, like I said, be quite rewarding at the same time. So to go along with the fact that these endurance sports are happening in one direction primarily, we develop some muscle imbalances and some compensatory patterns over time. So there's a term out there you may have heard called anterior chain dominance or quad dominance. Basically, this means that the muscles on the front side of your leg, the thigh, the quadriceps, and the hip flexors, basically are strong relative to those on the back side of the leg. So we need to make sure that the glutes and the hamstrings are, hitting on all cylinders so that they can complement some of the repetitive motions that you're experiencing with the running and the cycling. So think about doing movements like glute bridges, different deadlifts, balancing on one leg, and really making sure that those muscles can fire quickly and powerfully to help, really push you down the road or really stride out rather than continuing to just kind of overutilize the same tissues. And the bonus of this is that if you have knee tension or if you have hip tension, getting a little help from the muscles on the other side of the leg really will help decrease some of those discomforts that you're having. And then, of course, core strengthening, making sure that you're breathing fully while you're doing activities is really important as well. It's pretty overlooked. A lot of us tend to breathe a little bit too much in our chest. We take shorter, more panicked breaths rather than long relaxation breaths. So think of like, if you've been to yoga, they always teach you to do belly breathing. Like that's a good kind of basic way to look at everything. Just breathe deep down in your abdomen and then apply that to when you're training. So if you're squatting or you're running or you're riding your bike, just take those full breaths and you'll over time learn that you can get as much or maybe even more oxygen per breath than you would the other way.
Might skip over. Yeah, well, so I'll talk a little bit on the speed because a long time ago I used to have a little bit of speed in running, and now it's gone. So I'm just trying to build up the strength. So one thing in the off season that I also do coach as well, and a lot of the athletes that I have worked with or I am working with, when I'm designing an off season program for them, a lot of it, hitting on what Jason was just talking about on the mobility and the strength. But, I don't want people to lose that kind of turnover and that speed that they've kind of worked all season for. So, it's always, that doesn't mean that in the off season you have to go to the track once a week or anything like that. But here and there, just make sure you're throwing in some faster running, whether it's kind of doing a couple strides at the end of an easy run or throwing in some periods of faster running during your kind of longer session for the weekend, because strength and speed, they should complement each other. And a lot of times runners don't want to build up too much strength because they think their speed will go down, or they're too light, or they're too fast and they're not strong enough to kind of make it through a marathon or something like that. So we always want people to throw in a little bit of that speed while you're cross training in the off season to kind of get those muscle fibers continuing to work. So when you do have to kind of ramp back up, you can avoid some injuries and things like that because those muscles were still working during the off season. They didn't just go dormant for 2 to 3 months.
So I like to define these two words. There's a lot of keywords thrown out in the industry: flexibility, mobility, stability. I like to think of flexibility as our passive range of motion. So think of maybe bringing your knee to your chest as high as you possibly can in a standing position. That would be your passive range of motion, right? You're using external loads to help you be there. And then if you were to let go of your knee with your hands, try to maintain your knee as high as you can. That would be your active range of motion. There's always going to be a gap between the two, but think of your mobility as your active range of motion or your ability to control your flexibility. And it's really, really important to make sure that you're able to control the range of motions that you have, right? Because if we can get into a position, for instance, but we cannot express any sort of strength or in a particular direction, our ability to function there is actually really, really low. So spending some time in our end ranges and trying to decrease the gap between that active and passive range can really decrease your injury risk. Because if you get caught somewhere in that gray area between that, the difference between your active and passive range under speed or load, your body can't really handle those forces, and the chance of injury is pretty high. So it's always a good thing to make sure that you're expressing full ranges of motion in all directions. Okay, cool. Form's a big one. In the off season, it's a great time that you can kind of slow things down, rewind, and evaluate your stride or the way that your joints are tracking while you're running or you're riding the bike. Because if you're training a bunch and you're inevitably going to build out some inconsistencies in your motions, and it's great to just tighten your focus a little bit. So slowing things down is great. For runners and cyclists alike, making sure that your foot, knee, and hip relationship is all tracking in the same direction, right? Because the knee is kind of a dummy joint. It really wants to move in one direction, front to back. It has a little bit of rotational elements in there, but primarily moving in one direction. So all of the stability for that knee is coming from both the hip and the foot. We want to make sure that they're all tracking generally in the straight line. So think of yourself sitting on the bike and you're pedaling. If your knee is kind of diving to the inside, even just a little bit every single pedal, we're doing thousands of repetitions on each bike ride, and that causes wear and tear on the joint. So spending a little bit of time to make sure that, same thing goes for your stride, that your knee's tracking directly in that straight line, not only will make you more powerful, because the knee deviates one way or the other, that's kind of wasted energy, right? It's energy moving to the right or the left when we want it to go straight. So that not only that, but you're decrease that wear and tear on the joint. It's a great time too to take a look at your setup. So making sure your seat height and your pedal placements locked in is really key. A seat that's too extended will force you to reach for those pedals and can really cause you to tilt your hips repeatedly over and over during a bike ride, and that can cause a lot of wear and tear again on that low back hip region. And then thinking about posture is very important. A lot of runners and a lot of cyclists tend to have their shoulders in a forward rolled position, maybe the head's sitting too far forward or maybe in a little bit of extension. So making sure that everything is in a little bit more open position can help you definitely over the long run. There's a couple types of stretching. Dynamic stretching was kind of like stretching with movement, and then static stretching is your traditional get into a position and try to hold it. Both can be effective. There's a time and a place for both. Most people, when they do static stretch, they don't really do it for long enough. Kind of reach down, touch your toes for 10 seconds, and then, all right, I'm good. But in reality, you need to spend a little bit more time there. If you truly want to lengthen those tissues, kind of triple down on that. Spend at least 30 seconds. Spend a minute in those positions, and most importantly, make sure that you can breathe while you're doing it. That's another thing. People really, they want a super intense stretch because they think that's what they need, but in reality, a gentle stretch is plenty, and really what we're looking for is for the nervous system to relax those tissues down. If you can't breathe, that just simply isn't going to happen. So there's some cool ways that you can do this. Yoga is great. There's a bunch of different forms. We have different flows and vinyasas and basically more active yogas. And then there's yin yoga, which is kind of holding positions for much longer, but they're more gentle. So kind of toning everything down, getting your whole body and mind to relax. Those are incredible ways to do that. And then, of course, there's foam rolling. And a lot of people do this, but they don't really know why they're doing it. They don't know the most effective places to do it. So we thought we'd touch on that a little bit as well. As a general blanket recommendation, spending 1 to 3 minutes per muscle group per day is pretty solid. Again, we see a lot of people not spending enough time. They get on there 30 seconds and then they're done. That's not going to do you very much. We see other people who spend 10 minutes on the same muscle group, and they're hitting some serious diminishing returns there. So, hit this window and make sure that you can kind of spread the love throughout your whole body is great. For the endurance athletes, runners and cyclists alike, really focus on those muscles that you're using a lot. So the quads are a great one. Again, we're moving in that same direction. We have that quad dominance. So we want to make sure that we can decrease the tension, increase the fluid movement in those tissues. So roll the quads, roll the glutes, roll the calves, things like that. And then there's this muscle called the TFL. It stands for tensor fascia latae. It kind of sits where your coin pocket is on the front, kind of outside the upper portion of your hip. And really that's where the IT band kind of blends into. So there's a lot of people who foam roll their IT band, and that probably isn't doing you much harm, but it certainly isn't doing you a lot of good either, because it's just such thick, dense fascia. It's not going to get a release like a muscle would. So spending time addressing where that attaches to is that TFL. Again, it's that more or less where you think of your coin pocket as, can be one, very sensitive, so it means that you kind of need it. And in addition to that, it's really effective in decreasing the tension down that IT band. So the good news is you don't really have to spend time suffering rolling out your IT band. Just use it a little bit more effectively in some other areas.
So the last kind of piece we'll cover is, it's motivation, and that's motivations can be tough, throughout the year, but especially in the off season, when you see in most parts of the country, the weather's down, for us here in Seattle, it gets dark really early, and it's just harder for us to stay motivated to be active. So, the easiest way to do that is, to do it with a group of friends and try to find a group of people that have similar off-season goals, whether it's you want to, try to go to yoga 2 times a week, or, improve on your FMS score and your screening at a couple different points throughout the off-season. But just finding like-minded people that have similar goals is just going to help you stay accountable. It's always fun to kind of throw a couple, low-key races into there. I mean, I always do a turkey trot. It's always a fun way to, try to see what speed might still be there after fall. And it's just like a fun way to kind of just do it with a group of friends where you're not aiming for a PR, or, you're just going out there and you're having fun, and who knows, like, being in that competitive spirit, you might even have a better performance than you would think. And again, using the off season to kind of include goals to where you can track your progress, and part of it is seeing how much more mobile and flexible you can get throughout the off season, and doing screenings, working with professionals on that can really help you kind of just stay focused during a season where you might not be training as hard, or you might not have as many key workouts into that. So yeah, that's kind of the end of the slides. We'll now pause and kind of take some questions. I know Mason's been keeping an eye on the chat, so yeah, we'll just go from there.
Yeah, so that was great. The chat, we had a few questions that I was able to field. One was about finding functional mobility providers. Do you have any tips other than kind of use the link, or?
Yeah, you can certainly use the link. That's one way to go about it. Of course, Kinetic, all of our docs are capable of doing those movement screens and much more. And there's plenty of providers around, so just take a look and seek them out. There's a lot of trainers in the area too.
Sounds good. And the second comment and question was about foam rolling or rolling the IT band, and we had recommended maybe focusing on that TFL instead. Would you recommend doing the IT band and the TFL, or just trying to go with the TFL and seeing how you feel?
I'd really just focus on the upper portion of the hip there in the TFL. Again, it's not going to harm you, but it's more like getting the most bang for every minute you're spending doing these active recovery things, and you're going to get the most out of addressing the tissue rather than the fascia.
And if anyone else has any questions, you can just enter those into chat now. We'll leave a couple minutes here. But otherwise, that was awesome. I think I learned a lot about every topic. Thank you, Vishal and Jason, for contributing. Yeah, so enter those questions in the chat. We'll leave a couple more minutes here. And you can always follow up with questions on social media, and we will be sure to get those answers for you. That was awesome. All right, and we've got a question from Hans here. He says dosage suggestion for vitamin D.
I usually in the off season I would shoot for probably like 2,000 to 3,000 IU's a day. If you're really if you've gotten a recent screening and you're pretty deficient, you can go up to 4,000 to 5,000 and scale back a little bit from there. I usually focus in around 2,000 to 3,000 IU's per day.
And would you recommend pairing that with, what is it, calcium?
Yeah, calcium will just help with the absorption level of that. Pairing it with that, you're going to have to take a supplement to get that much vitamin D in there, and the good ones will have a little bit of calcium in there, knowing that it's just going to help aid that absorption.
Any other? Oh. It's using. So what should we consider if we use creatine?
You can continue to use creatine as a supplement in the off season before strength training and things like that. It's not gonna creatine won't replace your need for vitamin D, magnesium, or calcium. It's just it works on a slightly different mechanism in your body. But if you're comfortable with a nutrient like that, and you haven't noticed any major side effects, which some people do just with some sensitivity through various nutrients, then you can continue to use that as kind of like your pre-workout. But again, like I would still recommend keeping a higher intake of vitamin D, calcium, and magnesium during the winter and off season.
Sorry if I'm breaking a subject you don't support.
No need.
And Hans Florian also asks, who is climbing El Cap this coming season? He has he's done it. Hans, have you done it over 100 times? Is that what it is? I wish.
Yeah, it won't be me, but yeah, I wish.
While we're waiting for Hans here on his number of times of El Cap, what are some signifiers of proper hip, knee, and ankle alignment?
Say that again?
What are some signifiers of proper hip, knee, ankle alignment?
That's a good question. So think about, say you lunge forward, right?
You want video and you can do it that way?
I think this will be okay.
Okay, cool.
Say you lunge forward. The first thing you
Yep, we're good.
Good to go?
Yep.
All right.
All right.
So say you take that lunge. The first thing that you want is your foot to be actually pointing straight forward. You might notice that it turns to the outside a little bit. That might be the first indication that your foot doesn't always plant. Or think about just walking down the street, right? Do your feet turn out, or are they pointing straight ahead of you? Like that's very important information, because as you start to increase the speed, those inconsistencies are probably still happening, right? So just trying to practice walking straight with your feet going straight ahead is really good information. But let's go back to that lunge. So you lunge forward, your foot is the first thing I want you to look at. Is it turning out, or is it pointing straight ahead? Next, where's your knee tracking? Assuming that your hips are square, right? Because there's a good chance that they might want to shift one direction or the other. So keeping the hips nice and square, what's your knee doing? And a lot of the times we find that because the muscles in the glutes and external rotators in the hip aren't strong enough, the knee's going to dive inward. So making sure we can go through a position like a lunge, everything moving straight ahead, and really once you land, your foot, your knee, and your hip should be in one straight line, and you should be able to get back out of that lunge the same way. But that's true whether you move straight forward or to the side. Anything that happens, that alignment between the three areas should be pretty much the same.
All right. So Hans said 109 times on the nose, 170 times up El Cap. So Jason, if you're looking for a climbing buddy, we can link you up with Hans after, and he can take you up.
That's awesome. Incredible.
Any other questions? Any Nuun team member should hit me up. That's what he says, and you're an honorary member. So.
All right. I like it.
Be serious.
I like it.
Be serious.
That's crazy.
Awesome. So I think that about concludes it all. We'll call it here. The recording will be posted after the fact, so you'll have the opportunity to come back, review, really dive into any of those specific topics that we covered. And like I said, if you have any additional questions, feel free to share those on social media, and we will be sure to get the proper answers to you. So thanks again for joining us. It's been a lot of fun. I hope you learned some really good stuff. Thank you to Vishal and to Jason from Kinetic for coming and helping us out and contributing some awesome information. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Bye, guys.